setting up the YouTube stream, and let's see. Wait a few moments and I will post the YouTube stream to the Slack channel. Okay. Tari, can we get the next slide, please? Great. Thanks to those of you who have joined us early for this special session. This is a coffee chat with the AAS journals, and we have two special guests with us today. I'd like to remind you that these special sessions are coming from the special session subcommittee that is listed here. And today, one of the subcommittee members, Abigail Stevens from Michigan State University and the University of Michigan, is going to moderate our coffee chat today. Take it over, Abby.
Great, thank you, Rudy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us early. We're going to talk about astronomy research software and talk about specifically publishing that and how you can get credit for software and how you should give credit for software you use. But more in general, we're going to be talking about open source scientific software development, etc., that kind of stuff. So we are joined by Gus Minch and Peter Williams. Gus is one of the data editors for the AAS journals, so AppJ, AJ, letters and research notes of the AAS. And then Peter is one of the innovation scientists of the AAS and CFA, and I'm excited to learn what exactly that means. So I guess, Peter, can you tell us what an innovation scientist is?
Well, you know, I wake up every day and then I innovate, and then I have my coffee, and then I innovate some more.
You innovate before coffee? I'm impressed.
Yeah, so I have a specific responsibility, which is I'm the director of the AAS Worldwide Telescope project, which is
cool.
Piece of visualization software. And more broadly, you know, I think of it as I'm basically trying to help folks at the CFA and then through the AAS side, basically astronomers get more done using computers.
Yep.
You know, what
That's
I was
very true.
Tell people is, I mean, I don't know about you, but I literally spend all day sitting in front of a computer, and you know, you'd be surprised that some astronomers really are not making the most of those machines that they could. And so we're trying to help people, you know, use the tools that are out there, and you know, when needed, create tools that help them get their work done.
Yeah, nice. And Gus, we're going to talk in more detail about how software gets published through AAS, but can you tell us briefly what a data editor is?
Sure, and I'm prepared to answer questions about data as well.
Great.
Since
we'll end up talking about it because data is what you use for your software.
Yeah, so these are things that sort of don't fit into a PDF, and even in our move to the HTML version of articles. Don't often necessarily fit. We don't know how to fit them there as well. So, right, I'm one of the data editors. The first data editor was hired in 2000 when the journals went to the online article as the version of record. And his name is Greg Schwartz. And I came on about 7 years ago after 5 years at the CFA. Working on the virtual observatory. So the virtual observatory was really the stepping stone. And that's a good example of like, is it data or is it software that is the stepping stone to the kinds of tools we're going to talk about today. So what we do is we review articles at submission and at acceptance. At submission, we try to review over 90% of all submissions and ask questions like, is there data in this that needs to be cited? Is there data in this that needs to be preserved in some way? Or that could be, we haven't quite asked the review question yet, but if authors ask for review, then we try to work on that piece of the puzzle. Is there data that we could solicit from authors in a figure or in a table? Is there linked data that needs to be, find a better home than on a home page or on some site that's going to evaporate in a few years? And then at acceptance, we review the articles that have data in them. So those 90% or 100% at initial don't necessarily be a theory paper, in which case there may be some simulation material to preserve, and there may not be.
Yeah.
But at the end of the process, we review about 20%. I think last year I reviewed about 520 articles, and then my compatriot was about the same. So that's just over 1,000 articles that are reviewed at acceptance, out of about the 4,000 that are published each year. So across the journals, and I wanted to make sure that you also was mentioned that there's the Planetary Science Journal, which is a new,
yes, thank you.
open access journal, and then supplements too. But where things go in that ecosystem is not entirely clear. The corridors and things like that. But that's what we do. And I'm happy to go into detail about any of those pieces as we talk about it.
To get us warmed up, as the numbers are still increasing, I wanted to ask a little bit about your individual astronomy research software backgrounds. Like, what software packages did you get started with? Did you start as a undergraduate or grad student? And then also, what packages do you maintain now, and what do you use now in whatever research you do on the side? Gus, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think my my software background goes back to writing Monte Carlo sampling Fortran code for modeling luminosity functions of young star clusters.
Oh yeah.
And so it was all Fortran and IDL. And then I began to go to I had the pleasure of going to 2-week long summer schools on the Virtual Observatory back in the late 2000s. And this was where, you're introduced to 5 different software packages, one of which is Java, but all the other kinds of tools people are using, and understanding that there's this much broader ecosystem of tools, and that a lot of it is supported by individuals rather than necessarily big projects that are well funded. And then what I'm creating should probably be out there in some way as well. Although at the time, we didn't have something. GitHub wasn't as prevalent as a distribution and collaborative platform. And so I think then the next step would be, I remember sitting around the table with the people who would then create AstroPi. I claim no origin to that, but I remember sitting around the table at the CFA when that was being discussed and thinking this is really important. And then what do I maintain today? I sort of maintain AAS Tech on GitHub.
I use that. Yeah.
So I don't do any of the development. In fact, none of us do the development. We actually have to find someone who can develop LaTeX code and contract with them. But we maintain the issues and the websites for that. And then I have a set of little tools which I can show, and that are basically just Python scripts to help people do little things with their data. They're not meant to do too much, but
I think a lot of us
really
have
closely
those.
to publication rather than to research.
Sure. That makes sense. Peter, what about you? What's your software background in astronomy?
So I've been doing software for a lot longer than I've been doing astronomy, actually.
Cool.
My background, I feel like, is not very replicable. I started teaching myself C in elementary school. I was writing assembler code in high school and contributing to open source projects in high school. So this is like the late 90s. For me, I've always enjoyed that sort of magic of building things. And for whatever reason, I sort of got plugged into the open source development community very early. So I was using, I think I even managed to use RCS a few times before CVS was invented, before Subversion was invented, before Git was invented. Through
like
college,
the beginning of software time.
Well, depending on how you count things, but
sure.
So like through college, I remember I was, I started getting into astronomy pretty early there. Freshman year, I had a project working with Josh Bloom, who's now at Berkeley, where I remember saying, "Oh yeah, version 2 of Python just came out. It's got a lot of improvements over version 1." I've been there for all of Python 2. It's always just fascinated me. I've built on that since then. So back in those early days, I really thought matplotlib was bad. So I developed my own plotting package, which no one uses. Have done a lot of visualization stuff since then. I'm a radio astronomer, and so done a lot of radio astronomy. You can have very large data rates.
Definitely.
for my PhD, I was involved in the Allen Telescope Array, which was one of the pioneers of this kind of digital first radio telescope designs. And so we had to take Myriad, which for us was just primarily a Fortran package with all these statically sized buffers, and basically, every month increase the buffer sizes as our data got bigger, and try and build on that platform. So nowadays, my primary responsibility is this Worldwide Telescope software package, which I think is a great kind of microcosm of a big trend that I see in astronomical software, where essentially Worldwide Telescope has started as a Windows application, but what we're emphasizing in AAS is it's a web application. We basically take some C# code and compile it. It's basically JavaScript. And the way that I like to kind of frame it is, if you want to do any kind of visualization, interactive multimedia software development in the 21st century, you're writing code for the browser. You can do Zoom on it. You can play games on the browser. You can, run Jupyter. That's the platform that we'll be using for 99% of the kind of stuff that we used to use desktop applications for. But it's this entirely new development environment, and so a lot of our old applications kind of need to be, rebuilt or rethought to work in this new world. When, to look at my LSST data, I'm going to log into the science platform with my browser and do things, over the web. So it's a really exciting kind of paradigm shift in how we build the software that we use for a whole bunch of, not everything, but a huge portion of the way that we do science, especially things relating to visualization.
Absolutely. And even how we teach science, because I know that with some astronomy labs, you can make notebooks that have these widgets. So there's like bars you can slide. So you say, what happens if I turn up the gravity on this planet? What happens to the projectile motion? These kinds of things. So it's even working its way into science education and like teaching at the undergraduate level.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a reason why the web is taking over the world. And, another way I like to point out is basically the software industry has spent probably hundreds of billions of dollars developing this kind of software ecosystem that lets us build, a user interface to a large remote data set. That's google.com in a certain sense. That's also what we need as astronomers. Anyway, so and for things like letting people try out software, you can just run it on Binder Hub or something, as opposed to having to download and install a package. And this kind of gets to something that Gus was alluding to, where when it comes to actual publications, we're still, most of us download the PDF, and it's sort of that's the format that we use. But that format is pretty static compared to the ways that we sort of create and manage information in the 21st century. And one of the things that AAS Publishing is definitely interested in is sort of, navigating that evolution, because there's just so much exciting stuff that you can do if you're not locked into something that's fundamentally designed for like printing ink on rectangles of paper.
Right, which even harkens back to when the data that you were taking was in some sense like written down on a notebook. And so the way that you published it was very similar to that, whereas the data are all digital. So it makes sense to have publishing adapt to that.
Like one of the things that, for some of the work that I've done, there's been a lot of reading a paper, like looking at a table and copying numbers out by hand, which you can understand why things are done that way.
As a student, I've done that.
But kind of stepping back with your sort of like righteous innovation hat on, it's like, this is ridiculous that this is what we're doing in the 21st century. But as part of like Gus mentioned, AAS publishes 4,000 papers a year. You can't steer that ship very quickly, especially if you have a commitment to the long-term scholarly record, which is a really important component of how we
absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to give a quick shout out. So in my own software background, I did a bit of Java in high school. My arts credit was Java programming in like 2003 to 2007. And then I was going to do arts in college and then switched back to physics because I missed computer programming, it turned out. So I was also in software before I was in astronomy. And I've worked in C and a little bit of Fortran. And then I learned Python by myself for my PhD and have done a lot of Python stuff since. And one of the things that helped me get into it is software carpentry. And I know that there's also now data carpentry. And so some of our viewers, participants may also be familiar with software carpentry. And this reminds me of, Gus, what you talked about, how there was just like a crash course. This that I did was a week-long crash course in kind of how the software gets made, how you can use it, how to contribute to it. Because these days, most of it is contributing to larger packages that someone else is maintaining.
Absolutely, and I have to admit that one of the reasons why I have a limited number of places I contribute to is because I haven't necessarily learned all the communal behaviors around contributing software, and it's gotten so complicated that you really do need to make it a part of your research in order to be successful in a group setting. So I don't really know how that maps, that kind of community, especially large communities, map to questions of authorship and ownership of software. How do people receive credit for something? I'm not navigating it too quickly, but I am.
That's exactly what I wanted to navigate to.
How do you?
Yeah. So as a co-developer of the Stingray software package, which is used primarily for X-ray timing and spectral timing, but also for other wavelengths as well, optical and radio. I know it's been used for. One of the things, and also like all of us are junior people. The 3 lead developers are junior people, and finding ways to get credit for this work that we have done and be formally recognized in the structures that academia uses for recognition, for hiring and promotion and tenure and these kinds of things. One of the ways that, the primary currency is research papers. And so software has kind of adapted to that. And now that we can publish software papers. So Stingray published our like paper in, I think, 2019 in the AAS journals. And yeah, so basically this is how we start to get credit for this work that we have done in the formal sense, to kind of map that onto how the kind of freer world that software is.
Right, and I think that there's still. I'm grabbing your 2 papers because it's important to recognize that when we talk about Stingray, there are 2 reference articles or.
This is true. There's also JOS, the Journal of Open Source Software.
Exactly. So when Stingray was reviewed, it was viewed through the kind of the typical science editor review, with, I don't know how many peer reviewers you had for the science article, but that sort of looked at the application of the tool and the algorithms that underlaid it. But the JOS review, so the second article, asked the question, is how well engineered is this piece of software? Does it include test platform?
Yeah, we gave them our Git repo and they dug through it.
Right,
yeah.
They have a very detailed list, a very public, transparent list in terms of the kinds of things that need to be done in order for that article to be stamped as published by JOS. It's not a long article, right? It's intentionally a short summary. The code is in itself
and the documentation for the code is really where people should go to learn about the most up-to-date usage of Stingray and every other software package, I assume. And one of the things I want to mention for participants who are newer to the bigger realm of software, so unit tests are when you have code that automatically executes to test ideally every line of your software as you are contributing to the main software branch in your repository, GitHub, Subversion, whatever. And so these do things like check that when you added this other functionality over here, you didn't break something over there such that 1 + 1 no longer equals 2 or something like that. So the way that I used to do it was I had a data set that I knew what the answer should be, and I would just rerun my analysis on this quick little data set. But this is an automated way that kind of all major software packages do. It's pretty easy to implement if you look up unit tests. And then there's also all the notebook tutorials. So Stingray's made a big effort to have Jupyter Notebook tutorials to teach you not only how to use our implementations of different astronomical techniques, but of like the scientific background behind these techniques, because it is scientific research software. And so there are students learning this who are new to this area of research. So teaching them what a power density spectrum is, for example. So I don't remember if Joss looked at the notebooks in particular, but this kind of documentation is a really important part of the whole scientific software ecosystem. So when one of the things that you, Peter and Gus, had talked about was interactive figures and kind of interactive data sets. So this is something that the digital publishing and digital software and data publishing now enables. Because you can't publish a video in a printed page. Can you tell us more about how this works, how it came about?
Sure, I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, Gus probably knows more about the origin story. I mean, I don't know when the first interactive figures, I don't know when that idea first sort of reached production, before my time.
Well, I think there's two different stories, right? I mean, the first interactive figure was published in Nature by Alyssa Goodman, and it was in the PDF. And this sort of happened, I think, like I want to say 2010 or so, 2009. But the problem is like the data objects that are in a PDF, the underlying code, all of that was fairly difficult to support and difficult for authors to use. And so we started listening to to what was going on in the community, and especially noticed that the JavaScript driven graphics on the web have far easier data objects that can be reused. Their packages were coming online for building these types of objects. And so in 2014, we had an author who came and said, "Look, that's I can do this. I can create a multi-layer 3D object." And I can publish it on the web. And can we publish that web object in the article? And so that was 2014. And since then, we've published about, I think it's 113 interactive figures so far. And Peter would be the best person to talk about the current state of the technology, but it's really author-driven. It's bokeh, Plotly-driven, and these tools that are available. So it's JavaScript-driven, and it lives on the web version of the article.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to what I was saying before, sort of like the technology to use to create something like, okay, I want to have a figure that someone can interact with. Like the technology that makes sense for that is web technology. And so the way that our interactive figures work when we publish them is they're literally little iframes, they're little web pages embedded in your article. And getting back to the motivation, I mean, there's like, legit people who do kind of usability research, information research, where being able to interact with a figure and kind of play around with a little bit really does help people understand what's going on, understand what they're being shown more deeply.
Absolutely.
Like a common technique, which, you'll see in, say, someone's talk, they might build up a plot over the course of several slides, adding different layers. And, that's a pretty common thing that you can sort of set up for someone in an interactive figure. So our motivation is, this isn't just, because we can, gee whiz, like there really are real benefits to helping people understand what you're trying to get across to them when you can enable that sort of interactivity. But as Gus kind of alluded to, I mean, the thing is, it's more challenging to create. And so that's sort of been the story is figuring out kind of the tools that people need and how to support them and how to to set things up so that people can actually do the easy stuff. And then there'll always be people who are happy to write hand code JavaScript and create things from scratch, but we'd really like to set things up so that there's a few kind of standard sort of paradigms, like the progressive reveal of adding on several layers, or having a 3D object and being able to kind of spin it around, that we'll have pretty broad application in astronomy, we think. And so it's going to be a spectrum of things from like very custom work to sort of more standard approaches.
Yeah, and even more standard things, like if somebody has like an MHD model, so like people in theory and simulation, they have this 3D model of something and you want to be able to like scroll around and turn the model around so you can see the other sides of it. That very simple interaction can be really helpful in intuiting what they mean by this particular implementation. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some neat stuff that people are starting to experiment with augmented reality stuff, which kind of builds on that sort of framework, where I'm skeptical of a lot of VR things, but these are pretty neat. Where basically you can, get one of these augmented reality, like either a headset or just look through your phone, where you kind of see through your phone. They can like hold up a little cube and spin it around, and there's some 3D model that is replaced in the processed view, and so it's kind of a more convenient paradigm for checking out 3D structures of things than sort of trying to fly around it in your browser. Like you can literally just kind of look through your phone and be like, oh, that's what the backside looks like.
And I want to shout out to the Chandra table that tends to be at conferences. They have this really wonderful VR virtual reality simulation of the center of our galaxy around Sagittarius A star. You can like fly through it and look around the stars. And whoever was at the table when I was personally looking at it, he knew exactly how to time saying various things. And it was like a guided tour to the center of the galaxy. It was incredible. So yeah, that was super fun. So these things are great not only for research software, but also for research, but also for like the outreach, the education, public outreach aspect, which we can enjoy as well, which is great.
Yeah, and I know that the Chandra folks have also done like 3D printing of, I think, supernova remnants. And another thing there is for people who are visually impaired is being able to like literally hold that 3D model, can convey things. So.
Absolutely. And also there was a great Chandra Astrosonification that I've recently used in a talk, which is a wonderful way to kind of take data, added a new aspect to it. This wasn't published in a research journal, but it's a new way to access data, which I really love. So we've got a question from one of our participants, Jonathan McDowell. He says, I still worry about the long-term academic record. I remember when AppJ provided simulation movies on VHS tapes. I still have them somewhere, but no way to play them. I also don't have a VHS player. So how will journals migrate these JavaScript interactive figures when the technology changes?
Well, so I think that I'm not going to give the best answer to this question, but I think that it raises a set of interesting points, right? So the first point is, let's talk about animations briefly, because that's what was in those VHS. We have gone through, since the VHS era, animations have gone through a two-step process with the journals. First, we've all moved to the web, right? So we've all moved to some kind of container format for animations that's not a physical format. It's a web format, and it is still true today that the first animation that was published in our journals still works in a browser today, right? So the ability of the browser to continue to support file formats from, that would be 25 years ago, is commendable and a little bit reassuring. 25 years is a very long time in this. The second is that for animations, one of the things that we did was that we moved them out of supplemental materials and made them an actual figure in the articles. So now, instead of having a physical medium that's on your desk that you can't play, or a file that is sort of attached to the article, it is the animation is the figure. And so someone comes to the web-based version, they receive a YouTube-like stream of that animation in the browser. And the reason why I mention this technology is because it is an attempt to extend the time over which that animation will survive. There was a period a few years ago when Chrome claimed it was going to deprecate certain codecs. It didn't do that, but a web layer like that, HTML5 layer like that, to stream these allows us to do the transformation of that object into something that would continue to work on the web into the future. Now, Jonathan's question was about interactive figures in JavaScript, and the way we attempt to mediate or allow for the potential problems of JavaScript versions being deprecated. There's a couple of things we do. One, we endeavor not to use CDN type material. We kind of require authors to submit the libraries locally. That way we alleviate CDN breakages, minor packages that can bring down the entire web when they're delivered from remote sites. So we try to keep everything in-house. Another thing that we endeavored to do, and you won't see this uniformly in the 113 figures, is we attempt to capture from the author some kind of data that represents that figure, right? So that could be, if it's a 3D object, it could be the STL files or the object files that represent a standardized format that if the JavaScript framework goes away or breaks, the underlying format remains, and then people can download that and try to plug it into a new container or graphical interface. So we haven't yet, we have actually specifically had technologies that we wish to deprecate and say we don't want to use anymore because they never provide good user interfaces. But it's very much a inflow process where we're trying to capture data, capture things that can survive changes in browser technology. And I think that this is broadly true. We're not special in trying to understand what the next 5 or 10 years is going to hold for web-based technology. Peter probably has a better view than that on futureology of JavaScript. But
I don't know about that. But just so I'll repeat what I wrote in the chat. CDN, so that's a content distribution network. So this is one of these web services where, like, if you run a website, basically you pipe through the CDN is this layer, which means that they proxy your content all over the world, and hopefully it makes things faster. And they have a server in Japan, so people in Japan can download your stuff really quickly. But that means if the CDN goes down, then everything stops working. And so, which I think is a good emblem of kind of the broader problem here is, like, interactive figures are more complicated, and there's moving parts, and there's running code and things like that. And that means that they are more powerful, but also more prone to failure. I mean, there's some kind of spectrum from clay tablets to, fancy browser stuff. And as we get fancier, we can do more, but there is more of a risk of things breaking. And so, like Gus was saying, there's a lot of specific things that we can do to try and, minimize that risk. If you want to submit an interactive figure that depends on, like, Joe's random library myspace.com or whatever, we're going to ask you to use something that is more standard, and hopefully we can be more confident that it won't go away next year. And then I also think I think a good way to approach these things is sort of a defense in depth concept, where you have sort of the fancy version of, say, an interactive figure with a lot of running code, and maybe simplified versions that are less featureful but more reliable. So, for instance, every interactive figure in the journals also has to have a static version, which kind of captures the key elements of it. And so, even if the interactive figure goes away for a reason, we'll at least still have that static thing. And I think there's a balance to be struck between your conservatism about how long things will keep on working, and a desire to kind of deliver feature stuff. And I think unless you want to restrict yourself to kind of etchings on stone tablets, the way to go is to, be careful about what you're promoting, but try and move things forward, but also try to have this defense in depth to not strand yourself. Personally, I think people, JavaScript that runs now is probably going to run 100 years from now, just because billions of dollars are being spent creating and maintaining the software stack. But there is this very much risk of, it's a networked system of, I can run JavaScript code that pulls down other code from somewhere else. And, network things like that you do have a lot of potential points of failure. So we try to be conscious of that.
Yeah. So to recap what's been said, and also what Jonathan raises in the Q&A, the point is to budget for continuing maintenance and archive migration, and to really fund archives as an important aspect of continuing the science that we're doing today. So, and I also wanted to bring this back to some of the software development aspects of, if you're using so-and-so's weird little libraries from their personal webpage that are just like a tarball, they aren't even version controlled. This is a much more difficult basis to build your software and build your analysis pipeline on, as opposed to not necessarily maintained software, but things that are more, that have a track record in the public, whether that's via GitHub version control or via some other way. This is a much more open way to maintain your software and show how your science is done. Yeah. So We can take some more questions from the participants, either in the Zoom chat, the Zoom Q&A, or on the Slack. And otherwise, I think, I also wanted to point out, Rudy put in the chat and also put in the Slack that the VR demo of the Galactic Center, credit for that goes to Christopher Russell. So thanks for that. It's great. I love it. What I was wanting to chat about next is what the process is like for somebody who is a package maintainer of some astronomy research software and wants to formally publish it. Because as we've said, this is kind of one of the best ways to get credit for it. Gus, what would we do?
Well, so again, there's a bunch of layers, and you know, if I had talked about this maybe 4 years ago, there'd be 2 or 3 layers, and now there's maybe 5 layers, and
Sure.
we're trying to figure out how to so okay, so let's back up for a second and say what is it that you mean when you say publish, right? So I always took that to be that you have some kind of version of your thing that you say this is the version I want you to use, right? I don't know. It's version 1. It has this feature set. This is version 2. This is this feature set. And so when you look at the way that people are trying to describe these versions in the scholarly literature, you see things like the AstroPy 1 and the AstroPy 2 papers, right? That's just going to be the example that I'm gonna go with. And then you realize that there are many dozens of versions in between or around those 2 scientific publications that represent sort of versions of AstroPy. And what we think is happening, and I don't have the ethnographic study of AstroPy developers to back this up, but that over time at different versions, versions are being used 2.4.1, 2.5 when you're actually using that tool, and the authorship is changing as you have those different tools. So thinking in terms of a version model for software, you want to try to figure out how you can ascribe credit or cite the thing. I'm looking. I have to keep switching around. So I'm going to try to use authors as people who are writing papers and developers as people who are writing code. I'm going to use those 2 terms, and we'll see if it actually works. And so I'm using your code and I'm trying to cite it. I want to be able to find something that I can cite that gives the people who created that credit. That might be a paper, but the papers are separated by 10 years. So then it might be some version of the software that captures the people who have contributed that version. As a developer, you have to figure out, well, I work a certain way, right? I write code, I create, we go through a release process on GitHub or wherever you have your release process that demarks this as a version. I'm not interested necessarily in trying to, once I release that version, people download it, it hits, PyPy. I'm not trying to do too much more work in terms of signaling what it is that I want you as an author to do when you use this code, besides download the most recent version, the bug fixes and whatnot. So what I'm trying to say is that what has come out in the past few years are a couple of different things, right? So one thing that's come out is obviously software papers, right? JOS type papers. Another thing that's come out are DOIs for software. So what do DOIs for software represent? DOIs for software represent captured versions of code, right? So version 1 is captured, version 1.1 is captured, and the DOI is created. Metadata about that DOI is created in terms of titles, descriptions, authors, licensing, and then that material is stored in a repository with the code and the metadata, right? So this is less clear on GitHub because of it depends on your view. Someone hasn't officially said this is the authorship, this is the documentation. It's in a README, right? But when you create the DOI, that is a little more fine-grained and specific about that object. And so there are many packages that for every time they have a release, they have a DOI. Some packages have gotten quite complicated They have weekly releases and weekly updates of the metadata about their objects. So anyway, software DOIs is an interstitial step between I have a GitHub URL. I haven't told you exactly who the authors are, and I have a software paper which I released 10 years ago and that needs to be updated, right? So that's the purpose of software DOIs. And so and if someone cites, if you create a software DOI for a particular version and someone cites that version, it will be indexed by AAS. So if you create a software DOI and no one cites it, then it will not be indexed by DOS. I'm just giving you information right now about the current workings of the software citation ecosystem. So one of the things, so that's what has happened over the past sort of 4 years. Things that you can engage with as a software developer. If you want to see versions of your software, appear in ADS, be cited directly in papers, and then you start to wonder about the process. I think starts to diverge, right? And the way it diverges is, well, I'm interested in capturing exactly what software I use for the purposes of reproducibility, right? And when you start talking like this, now you're talking about like commit level metadata, right? And no one's showing that there's some provenance graph inside of GitHub or inside of these GitLab or the other tools, but that's not really transparent who receive attribution for any single commit. And so one of the things we're working on right now in software citation is how do we capture something that's in the moment, like for a specific commit. And if you throw out authorship, I want to make sure that people are aware of a project called Software Heritage. Software Heritage essentially scans and archives everything on GitHub, everything on Software SourceForge, all these websites, and you can dump your material into there as well. And it creates a persistent copy, right? GitHub is not persistent, right? GitHub is not a repository. But Software Heritage represents a repository-like version of GitHub and all these other tools. And so if you want people, or if you're an author, remember the author-developer dichotomy, if you're an author who wants to cite for reproducibility the exact versions of codes, then you want to find like a copy of that material on Software Heritage. And then if you want to, so I'm going to stop right there. But my main point is that there are these tools that are coming online to give you the ability to do different things.
Absolutely.
I hope that prompts some questions.
Yeah. So my final remarks, and then Gus and Peter, you can each give them. We have 2 minutes left. So basically, also this came about on Twitter earlier this week with Brian Greffenstedt saying software developers and maintainers like myself want you to contribute to our software. There's this notion that we don't want your icky little fingers getting into our code. We desperately want your contributions. We are merely the people who kind of keep an eye on things and maintain things, but we really want the community contribution to open source software. When you have a good version, publish a paper. Cite the software you use, check the README, as Gus was saying, or the Astrophysical Source Code Library, ASCL. The entry has a thing on how the software developers want you to cite and give credit to their software. And give the version number, as Gus was saying. I always give like my specific AstroPi version number in the papers that I publish in the software area, along with the citation they want. And as we were saying with Jonathan's comment, grant agencies and funding bodies should allocate funding for ongoing archival maintenance and of software and data, since this is so important for how we do astronomy. We don't want to lose that. Gus Mensch, thank you so much. Peter Williams, thank you so much. Do you guys have any last things you want to say in 30 seconds?
Can people reach out to you if they need to help with this subject?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks very much. We'll put the links for stuff we've talked about in the Slack, and we'll see you guys again at noon for the rest of the data session.